We live surrounded by things that demand our attention. A message, a notification, a piece of news, a conversation that gives us nothing. Everything seems to want to occupy space in our heads. And when we allow each stimulus to decide for us, there comes a time when we end the day tired without really knowing what we have done with our hours. That is why learning to direct attention is so valuable. It is not about remaining isolated from the world or turning each day into a fight against any distraction. It's about knowing where we want to be mentally and for how long. A person can have good ideas, talent, and opportunities. But if you change direction every time something demands your gaze, you will hardly get far with what you start. Concentration is built in a much simpler way than we usually imagine. It begins when we put aside what we don't need, we close what distracts us and dedicate a period of time to a single task. It seems like something minor. It is not. Every time we stay with a task until it is finished, we are teaching our mind not to escape at the first sign of boredom. We are recovering a capacity that constant interruptions weaken. And staying matters. Because many of the things that are worthwhile do not provide an immediate reward. A project takes time to grow. A skill needs practice. A company goes through periods in which the effort is not yet reflected in the results. Even a good decision can take months to show its consequences. There begins another test. It is no longer enough to concentrate. We must continue. Enthusiasm can help us during the first days. It makes us start strong, imagine possibilities, and feel that everything is within reach. The problem appears when that emotion disappears. Because it disappears. There comes a morning when working is no longer exciting. A difficult week is coming. Delays, errors, and responsibilities appear that we would prefer to avoid. Then we discovered whether we depended on desire or if we had really made a decision. People who manage to maintain projects for years are not permanently motivated. They also get tired. They also doubt. They also go through days when they would rather do anything else. The difference is in what they do when those days arrive. Some people constantly negotiate with themselves. I start tomorrow. Next week I will have more time. When I have better conditions, I will do it seriously. And while they wait for the right moment, the months go by. Others accept something much simpler. There will be good days and bad days, but both are part of the journey. You don't need to perform a feat every morning. You need to fulfill what is required. 1 hour of work well spent. A finished page. A pending call that is finally made. A problem solved before going to bed. Seen in isolation, it may seem insignificant. Repeated over months, it completely changes the direction of a life. Patience comes in precisely here. Sometimes we confuse patience with waiting. But waiting without doing anything doesn't build much. The patience that produces results is different. It consists of continuing to work when there is still no visible reward. A farmer does not dig up a seed every morning to check if it is growing. He does what is appropriate, takes care of the land, and allows the process to take its course. Something similar happens with many projects. Forcing results before their time can destroy what was just beginning to develop. It also happens with us. Learning something new is uncomfortable because for a time we are beginners. We make mistakes that will later seem absurd. We need to repeat movements, concepts, or procedures that we still do not master. That stage bothers many people so much that they give up. They want to feel competent before having paid the price of becoming competent. But there is no shame in starting without mastering something. The real difficulty is in enduring the period during which our level is still far from what we imagine. When we learn to go through that stage, mistakes change their meaning. They stop being a sentence about our capacity. They become information. Something went wrong. Because? What part depended on us? What can we do differently next time? These questions are much more useful than spending hours blaming ourselves or looking for someone to vent our frustration on. A mistake observed calmly can save months of future mistakes. And this leads us to a different form of trust. There are people who confuse security with appearing invincible. They need to have an answer for everything, defend every opinion, and show that no one can question them. But a secure person doesn't need to live that way. You can listen to criticism without breaking down. You can admit that you were wrong. You may change your mind when better arguments appear. And you can also say no. This last capacity is especially important. Each yes has a price. When we accept a request, an invitation, a responsibility, or a project, we are giving up a part of our time. That's why saying yes to everything ends up being another way of abandoning our own priorities. Saying no respectfully does not make anyone selfish. Sometimes it simply means recognizing that we cannot be available to everyone without abandoning what we must also do for ourselves. The same goes for other people's opinions. Listening is useful. Obeying every opinion we hear is not. There will be people who understand our plans and others who consider them absurd. Some will speak from experience. Others will do it from their own fears. Our job is to learn to distinguish some voices from others. We can listen to advice without immediately giving it control of our decisions. We can pick up what makes sense, think about it, and then decide. That space between what we hear and what we do is an essential part of autonomy. There is also a space between what we feel and how we respond. A provocation can produce rage in seconds. Criticism can awaken the immediate desire to defend ourselves. Bad news can push us to make a hasty decision. But feeling something does not force us to act at that very moment. Sometimes a few minutes completely change an answer. When we let the emotion lose intensity, we see details that were previously hidden. Perhaps we discover that the discussion is not worth our time. Perhaps we understand that criticism contains a useful part. Perhaps we found that the problem was smaller than it seemed. Governing oneself often begins there, in not surrendering our actions to the first impulse that appears. Over the years, these small decisions begin to relate to each other. The person who learns to concentrate can work longer on what matters. The one who learns to continue does not give up every time the motivation disappears. The one who accepts her mistakes learns faster. The one who knows how to say does not protect her priorities. And the one who thinks before reacting avoids many conflicts that should never occupy her energy. Then something interesting happens. All that internal preparation begins to be reflected outside. Because there comes a time when thinking well is no longer enough. You have to build. An idea that remains forever in our head does not solve any problem. A project that never leaves paper cannot help anyone. Knowledge that is not used ends up being a collection of possibilities. Reality is where our ideas prove their worth. And reality rarely respects our plans. We can study a project for months and discover, when we start it, that part of it doesn't work. We can calculate costs and then find ourselves with an expense that we had not anticipated. We can believe we know what people want and discover we were wrong. That does not make the project a failure. It gives us information that we didn't have before. The problem appears when we fall so much in love with the initial plan that we prefer to defend it rather than recognize what is in front of us. Changing the method does not necessarily mean giving up the objective. In many cases, it means protecting it. If a door doesn't open, we can look for another entrance. If a strategy consumes resources and does not produce results, we can modify it. If we discover a better way of doing things, there is no merit in continuing to use the old one just because it was our first choice. Building also means correcting. And the bigger the project, the more times it will have to be done. Lasting results often come from that combination: clear direction and enough flexibility to learn along the way. The same thing happens with money. Seeking only a quick profit can lead us to make decisions that seem attractive for a few weeks and prove costly years later. Creating something that retains its value requires a different mindset. First, we must ask ourselves what problem we are capable of solving. Then, for whom? And finally, why anyone should trust us to solve it. Money usually appears around the value that a person, a team, or a company manages to contribute. The more useful what we do is and the better we know how to do it, the greater the chances we will have of building a stable position. This also does not guarantee that every attempt will work. There will be projects that go wrong. There will be decisions that, seen years later, we would have made differently. There will be money lost, time poorly spent, and opportunities that we did not know how to recognize. It's part of building in the real world. The important question is not whether we will ever fall. The question is what we will do with what the fall teaches us. We can come out of a bad experience only with resentment. Or we can come away with an understanding we didn't have before. We can discover where our foresight went wrong, what signals we ignored, what knowledge we were missing, and what we should change before trying again. So the fall leaves something behind. Experience. And well-used experience modifies our way of moving forward. At this point, many of the ideas we have covered begin to come together. Attention to choosing where we put our energy. Consistency to remain when enthusiasm disappears. Patience to allow processes to mature. Criterion to listen without handing over our decisions to others. Calm so as not to react to every provocation. Humility to learn from mistakes. And willingness to take our ideas to the field where they are really put to the test. None of this needs to become a complicated theory. Its true value appears when it is part of an ordinary day. When a distraction comes and we decide to continue. When we want to give up and do one more part. When we discover an error and correct it. When an opportunity doesn't fit with our plans and we know how to reject it. When something goes wrong, instead of getting caught up in frustration, we look to see what we can learn. That's where ideas stop being words. They become behavior. And when a behavior is repeated for long enough, it begins to change the direction of our lives. We don't need to control everything that will happen tomorrow. We need to learn to better govern what does depend on us today.